Today we're going to talk about why most music startups fail, or as one could call it, why Turntable.fm loves Pandora Radio right now. So every year, as sort of an intro, dozens of music startups attempt the impossible to make their product mainstream. And in the music sector, this is a particularly challenging task because the truth is that most music startups fail. They fail to live up to the initial hype, they fail to generate profit, and they fail to become the next Pandora. You know, many make a huge splash on Mashable and TechCrunch and are never heard from again. So why do most music startups die? Are they developing products that no one wants? Are they solving problems we don't have? What are the culprits?
I think what makes companies work is where you don't think that there's necessarily a problem or an opportunity. Somebody's found a new way to make it happen. But what you just said prior to that, intrigued me, which is you really mentioned bad product or products that make you work. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather talk about what makes a company succeed rather than what makes it fail.
Right.
And what makes it succeed is a very clear product, and I always just look at the demo. So if you have a great demo and it works really well and it excites people, that leads to a lot of sort of viral growth, word of mouth, particularly on mobile. People talk about things, and that's a really clear, great thing when the product works. And it's amazing how many products really don't work. Mm-hmm. And that's why I like to really just start with the demo as the first contact that I have with the product. So if somebody has a startup here, anybody have a startup thinking about raising some dough here? Okay, we got some few hands. So if you are excited about your demo and it's demoable, then please show it to me. If you don't think it's ready yet to show, then please wait until it's showable. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that people, definitely miss, is just making it clean and simple and exciting. And it's hard to do, really hard to do.
Joey, what do you think? Do fanatic founders misjudge the potential market for their product? And how do you perhaps test your assumptions?
I think one thing that's important to note is that that happens in every industry. I mean, every founder thinks like everyone has this problem, when usually for most people it's just them. So it's not necessarily unique to music, but I think one thing that's particularly challenging for music is that people are really ingrained in the way they do things. So nowadays, a lot of like the most successful startups launch things that are truly unique products that are like, completely different, and that once you start using them, you feel like you can't live without them. But in the music space, I mean, say you create like a better radio platform. The reality is that like Pandora is an awesome radio platform. So like to make something that's going to get people to use your product instead of theirs, it has to be markedly better. And as a startup, just getting started, it's extremely difficult to create something better than what's already been developed for the past 6 years. So when you think you're solving a problem, the chances are that at the beginning you're not going to solve it better than the people who've been doing this for a long time, and it makes it really challenging. We've just experienced that. Sometimes we try features that we think are cool and people don't like them, and then we see other sites take off that use features that we think are ridiculous. And really, there's just I don't think there's any way to know in advance what's gonna work, and ultimately it just has to really revolutionize things, or people are just going to keep turning on iTunes.
So I once did a chart which I looked at, this is probably in 2008, and I looked at all the music startups that were looking at social at the time. There wasn't as many, it was mostly a personalized music focus at the time, and social was becoming bigger, but Last.fm was around. And there was a whole bunch of companies, so the list was very long. And then a few years later, I had to update the chart for some investors, and I realized that a lot of the companies weren't there anymore, and it was a whole new batch, and so I had to change a lot of logos. It just made me realize how much innovation goes into music. There's tons and tons of startups that are developed over that 2-year period, all going after this opportunity, and many of them are coming out with very similar general approaches. And it made me also realize that if you're going to be successful, I believe, with a music startup, you have to quickly understand your edge, your difference, to build your community from there. And because they do that. Your community is already spending its time with very simple, very functional platforms like YouTube. Let's start with YouTube. They spend a lot of time there just checking out new songs, checking out what their friends like. Then now Spotify is becoming as easy in a platform as any to check out music. And then of course Pandora when you want to have more of a radio experience. So you have these really great experiences that, that in some cases don't even need social. But for us, we knew that we wouldn't be able to grow if we didn't have some sort of differentiation in our experience.
Yeah, I think that like it's kind of neat. The direction you want to go is an option now, where before it wasn't. We had radio or TV, and it was supported by advertising. That's it, right? It wasn't like an option to subscribe to some radio station and just have the ads removed. And so now people get to have both experiences, and I think history has shown there's more money in the advertisers paying for the service than the consumers of the service paying.
Right.
But it'll be interesting to see if that changes. Like, Larry, do you have any, and I'm only saying this because of your insight in Pandora, Pandora has $36 a year you can miss all the ads, which is a pretty ridiculously low amount of money to pay for the value that it gives.
I agree.
Is that do you know if the average Pandora listener is that how much the average Pandora listener is worth that they don't pay? Like, is that about how much they're worth the advertiser? It's $36, so that's the trade-off?
I don't know the answer specifically enough to actually comment on it, but if somebody subscribes, then it definitely has value to Pandora. It's a good thing if they subscribe, but if they don't subscribe, then that's okay.
It's still being monetized.
Yeah, it's the free user is a very high value user.
One of the interesting sort of insights in the music startup landscape right now is that it's starting to look like that a lot of the problems to solve are actually really hard problems, right? We're looking at, A&R is a mess, licensing is a mess, and a lot of the more sort of simple things like radio, music discovery are already sort of saturated markets. What do you think about that? Are music startups left with hard problems to solve, or is there still room for innovation on other fronts?
First, I will say that I think solving the radio problem is insanely hard.
Right.
So I just think APIs have made it easier to build a product, but actually solving, I think that is an enormous problem still. I mean, if you really want to solve it well, I think it's not an easy thing to do. I also, just to go back on what we were talking about before, I also want to say that I actually think like the whole feature versus company thing, I think most good companies start out as a feature and either build a community or something around that feature to make it into a company, or build a company around it in general. So I don't think that's a bad thing to do, to start as a feature. I think it actually is I recommend it usually.
And sometimes the feature of the product becomes the product.
Yeah. As far as what's left, I think when you look at the traditional music business that has always existed, there are things that still could be built to replace, to take the functions over that exist today. What I think is more interesting is thinking about what those if those functions didn't exist before, what they would be if we started thinking about them today. Which some people might say you end up in the same place, but I think it's hard. I think one of the reasons that makes it a little bit harder is because you've got so many people who that's what they do, that they're not going to be very supportive of coming out and redoing A&R. There's an industry built around that right now. So, but I don't know. I think it's all hard. It's not doing a startup is really, really hard.
Right.
And there's no easy problem to solve. Otherwise, it really wouldn't be that interesting of a problem to be working on. So.
I think that the panel title, why music startups fail, or just using music in the startup. I think startups fail. All industries, and I think music adds a layer of complexity or unique challenges that the music industry brings to the table, which potentially makes it even harder, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. But every startup is super hard to. There's all books about lean startup. Like if you've read that book on how to reduce the risk of launching.
Yeah, I would even put on top of that, like it's not just the licensing and just it's not all the crap that the industry makes it harder. It's also like no one is like sitting in their dorm room being like, oh my god, let's build inventory management software for steel companies. Like, it's not what they're thinking about. They're sitting around listening to music. And so there's a lot more music startups because it's much more fun to build a music startup.
Which,
You haven't been to the Steel Institute.
as a startup that is highly reliant on emerging and sort of independent music, how have you responded to sort of the criticism that you don't have popular music in your service that more mainstream users might be looking for?
Luckily, we don't really get that criticism because those people just leave our website. But so we actually just get like tons of people who are really, really excited that the music we offer is different than what they normally hear. So right now, I mean, we ultimately expect to grow our catalog to the point where it will be a good service regardless of what you're looking for. But right now, it's just particularly good for people who want to discover something new or are just kind of tired of hearing the same playlists over and over again. They can turn on Earbits and 95% of what they hear they will have never heard before. And that's actually a really big advantage for us.